Welcome to ER Verbs Are Easy. Ils sont faciles. Today we're going to cover a lot of information. We're going to talk about what exactly is a verb or an infinitive. What does conjugate even mean? Should I conjugate both verbs if I have two in one sentence? And how exactly are they easy? And then, of course, I'm going to give you verbs that we will be tested on in class, as well as loads of other verbs that I feel like are necessary. And if you're the kind of person who wants all the information up front, like me, well, then I'm going to give you extra. I'm also going to cover how to say things like don't, and then if you want to tell somebody to do something, you want to command them. So what exactly is a verb? It's a word of action, occurrence, or state of being, and all phrases have a need of a verb that's conjugated. Do you remember when we were talking about subject, verb, object? Well, let's take a look at some examples of what I'm talking about. Words of action are things like dancing and eating and partying. Occurrences, becoming. So, il devient mieux means, he's becoming better. It's an occurrence. Also, state of being. Nous sommes intelligents. Our state of being is intelligent. So, the is, becoming, dancing, those are all verbs. They are the action of the sentence. And all sentences, again, need a conjugated verb, a subject and a verb and an object. Notice this has two verbs because I like to eat the chocolate. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in just a bit. What we're going to start off, though, talking about is what exactly is an infinitive versus a conjugated verb. And we've actually seen this before because we've already talked about être, to be, and avoir, to have. Être and avoir are both infinitives, and we've seen them conjugated. Je suis, tu es, il est. Nous sommes, vous êtes, ils sont. And j'ai, tu as, il a, nous avons, vous avez, ils, elles ont. So let's get a little in-depth about what are some of the similarities that they have and what might we see in the future. I had mentioned before that the tu es, tu as are important because they both end in s, and we're going to see this es ending again. Also, with the nous avons, the ons you're going to see again. Nous sommes, completely irregular because être is the most used verb in French. And the more you use a verb, the more irregular it winds up becoming. Vous avez, this easy ending is going to help us a little bit early or a little bit later when we're talking about ER verbs. And lastly, il and elle form the plural, have an NT. Now, the ONT is going to be helpful when you're also remembering how to conjugate être and avoir and aller and faire. They all end in ONT. But just the NT part you're going to find very helpful when conjugating ER verbs. Let's take a look at the amount of ER verbs, the infinitives, that we're going to have to know for our test. Please notice that again, these all translate to two. So that ER ending at the bottom, or at the end of each word, it means two. So we have aimer, arriver. Notice how the I's in French have that E sound. Déjeuner, E with accent aigu has that strong A sound. Dîner, écouter, habiter. Notice the H isn't pronounced. Inviter. Notice the N does not become pronounced. There's no E following it. We nasalize the vowel in front of the N. Inviter. Jouer à, or de. When you want to play a game, you use the à. If you want to play an instrument, you use the de. Parler, préparer, regarder, rester, réviser, téléphoner, and travailler. This is a pretty good list of beginning verbs. And one of the things about this list is it has the verb aimer, which means to like. And there are several similar words like to love, to dislike, to hate, to enjoy, to practice. These are all kind of like a helping verb because you can like to do something else, which means then you'll have another verb in your sentence. And what happens when you have two verbs in the same sentence? In order to talk about what that's going to look like, we need to understand how to translate. So, tu aimes manger le chocolat, a wonderful correct sentence, meaning you like to eat the chocolate. You are liking to eat the chocolate. Sorry about that typo. You are liking to eat the chocolate, and you do like to eat the chocolate. Notice this could also be a question. Do you like to eat the chocolate? This is one of the great things about French is that when I conjugate one verb, it can mean 3 different things in English, like, do like, am liking. This means that when I'm trying to ask a question, all I have to remember to tell myself is, I don't need the do. I just write one sentence, you like to eat chocolate, and it can mean, do you like to eat chocolate? If I put a question mark at the end. This is amazing. So in English, we have almost 3 present tenses to choose from, whereas the French just have 1. So this makes it a little easier. Now, what happens when we forget that this is what happens, that we have all these meanings, and we think, oh, I have a verb and I have to conjugate both of them? Well, you would have tu aimes manger le chocolat. Oops, another typo. You like eat the chocolate, which does not make sense. So again, when we have 2 different verbs, the first one that's conjugated can mean 3 different things in our present tense English. If we conjugate the second one, it's going to sound funny. So we are only conjugate our first verb. Now I said conjugate a lot there, so let's take a look at some conjugations of the verb so we can figure out how exactly is this complicated meaning with 3 translations in English. How are they exactly easy? Well, let's find out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say these aloud, and then hopefully you will pay attention to what makes them easy. So je parle, tu parles, il parle, nous parlons, vous parlez, il parle. Did you notice something? Inside this lovely boot, all of these sound exactly the same, except for the subject. So let's say this again. Je parle, tu parles, il parle, nous parlons, vous parlez. So when we're speaking in a sentence, or we're talking aloud, we don't actually have to remember, oh yeah, this is tu, it has an S. We just kind of almost say the root of our verb. Pretty handy. Let's take a look at aime. J'aime, tu aimes, il aime, nous aimons, vous aimez, il aime. Same thing is going on here, huh? Let's take a look at one more, and then we'll discuss. Je dîne, tu dînes, on dîne, nous dînons, vous dînez, il dîne. And again, we have the same thing. So pronunciation's pretty easy. Well, let's think a little bit more about conjugating. Were you able to figure out how to conjugate? Well, here's the steps. If we want to say, I like to eat at restaurants, you choose the verb like, because the to eat is an infinitive, so we don't need to conjugate that one. So we just need the like. We take off the ER at the end. That means to, right? Figure out who is I. Okay, I is je. Knowing je, I know which ending to put on my verb, which is just an E. And then what the rest of the sentence. So j'aime manger au restaurant. Oh, we don't need an S there. So this is really, really easy. So at this moment, all 15 of these verbs, you should be able to conjugate and use correctly in a sentence. That's not too bad. However, I do have a list of 194 high-frequency verbs. And what I mean by high frequency is they use are often, a lot. And when I went through the list here on this PowerPoint, I tried to put in a nice bright yellow the things that I know, for instance, that we'll be using in this unit. So you'll have to learn at some point. And then I also made a little bit lighter some of the ones that I know you will hear, especially me say perhaps a lot in class, like I tell my kids to arrête all the time. So you might hear me say that in class. And I do this because I am the kind of person who wants to know, as soon as I learn how to do something, I want to see the list of possibilities so that I could create as many sentences as I would need to. And again, all of these verbs that you see in front of you are ER verbs. They can easily be conjugated based off of what we just learned. Now, every once in a while on this, you're going to see something in parentheses on the list, like T becomes double T outside of the nu and vu form. So in the boot, the one T becomes two T's. So there are very few here that are just slightly different just to keep hold of that sound. And those are kind of a little far between. However, there are about 4 verbs on this list that we will see the conjugation change a little bit more than just two T's in the boot, or the I can become a Y, or how we talked about there's two L's in the boot for appeler and one L outside. Let's take a look at a sound changing verb. So if we find the root of these three verbs, manger, voyager, partager, and commencer, they end in G or C. And as we know, G and C have specific sounds that can change. So when they're followed by an E, they have that nice soft sound. But when they're followed by an O, they will have a hard sound. So if I were to say these words now, it wouldn't be mangeons, it would be mangon. It wouldn't be commençons, it would be commencons, which sounds pretty bad. So in order to keep those soft sounds, there are things that we can do. And again, this is only in the new form where that would be a problem. So in the new form for manger, voyager, partager, we just add an extra E to keep a soft sh sound. And the cedilla on the C keeps that a soft sound. So again, this is a really easy way. It's really quick, it's really short, and we're going to see these verbs probably quite often. So what have we done on our list? Quite a bit. Only thing we haven't talked about yet are imperatives, which means commands, and negatives. So let's take a look at these couple sentences, and we're going to turn them into imperatives or commands and negative sentences just to show you how that will look. So you can say a regular, normal statement that's tu es gentil, you're nice. Tu as un biscuit, you have a cookie. Vous aimez le fromage? Do you like cheese? Nous marchons au centre commercial. We walk to the mall. Nous mangeons beaucoup. We eat a lot. Tu ne téléphones pas Jacques? You're not calling Jack? Tu n'invites pas Jacques? You don't invite him? So what happens when we want to turn these into two commands? Well, first of all, être and avoir have irregular commands. So those you'd have to go back and look at. Like sois gentil, aille un biscuit. But to command with an ER verb is actually really easy. We just take off the subject. Instead of vous aimez le fromage, we just have aimer le fromage. And that's telling somebody, hey, like cheese. Marchons au centre commercial. Instead of nous marchons, it's, hey, let's walk. Mangeons beaucoup. Let's eat a lot. Ne téléphone pas Jacques. Don't you call Jack. Or don't call Jack. N'invite pas Jack. Don't invite Jack. Oh, we don't need question marks on these. So notice how we don't need the new form or the new pronoun. We don't need the to pronoun. And one last thing that we're not going to do is we're not going to have an S here. We need to take off this S. That's actually a typo. So let's talk about negatives. How do I make all these regular sentences negative? So all I have to do is sandwich the verb, remember that action or state of being, with ne and pas. And then ne, the E gets dropped and you have an apostrophe if the next word starts with a vowel. So n'est pas gentil, you're not nice. Tu n'as pas de biscuit, you don't have a cookie. Vous n'aimez pas le fromage, you don't like cheese. Nous ne marchons pas au centre commercial, we're not walking to the mall. Nous ne mangeons pas beaucoup, we're not eating a lot. Tu ne téléphones pas Jacques, you're not calling Jack. Tu n'invites pas Jack. I don't know what Jack did, but we're not going to invite him at this point. So basically, the negative is really easy. You just sandwich the verb. And we'll hear and see a couple different types of negatives in the future, but for right now, let's review what we've learned. An infinitive says to do something, so we have an ER. To conjugate it, we just take off the ER and add whatever ending we need. That translation has 3 different meanings in English. The boy walks, the boy does walk, and the boy is walking. Similarly, if I want to say they study law, they study law, they do study law, they are studying law. When we have a G or C on the stem of that root, manger, partager, voyager, or commencer, we have to add that extra vowel or the cedilla in order to make that function. And we only have 15 verbs that we will be tested on. And this is going to be very easy for us because all we have to do is memorize what they mean. And then perhaps when we get our test, we write this lovely little chart in the side, E-E-S-E-O-N-S-E-Z-E-N-T. And then we know that we take off that ER ending and add whatever stem is in the correct box. We know we only have to conjugate the first verb. We sandwich it between ne and pas if we want to make it negative. When we're commanding, we drop the subject, so tu, nous, or vous, because you can only command tu, nous, or vous. And then in the to form, we just drop the S. So hopefully this was very informative. If you have questions, of course, let me know. Et bon après-midi.